All right, in this third part of the series, I'm going to go over some different sanding options I've tried. So the first thing you see in my first power carving video, I use this sander by Festool, which is their RO90 sander, one of their Rotec sanders. This sander is really great because it has different modes. It has a rotary mode, which is just kind of a direct rotary, similar to a grinder, not exactly the same, but similar, where it's just going around in circles. Then it has a random orbit mode, which is just like any random orbit sander you've ever used. And then it has just a vibratory only mode, kind of like an old, like quarter sheet or third sheet sander, stuff like that, or one of the triangular sanders. This sander in particular is expensive, but I really enjoyed it for this task, and I've used it quite a lot for different power carving options, or different power carving projects, I should say. One of the things I found helpful, that it has a smaller pad. It has a 90 millimeter pad, which is why it's called the RO90. Which I think is somewhere in the 3-inch range compared to most sanders, which are 5 inches. Between the different modes and different grits, I found it to be really, really helpful and really versatile. So that's a great option if you're really getting deep into this, but it is a bit expensive. Also on that, I've used this interface pad, which is kind of a squishy foam here. And that's just Velcro backed on front and back so that you can attach it to the sander, and that kind of wraps around curves. So you see here, you can kind of wrap around curves as you sand. That's helpful for some of these different graceful curves and things that you can get through power carving. So that was definitely very helpful and very well used as well. Another thing that I tried was this Festool RAS115 sander. Now, to a lot of people, myself included before I got it, it just looks like your standard angle grinder with a big green logo with an F in it and green accoutrements. And so it's quite expensive if you're looking at it just as an angle grinder. It's not an angle grinder, I came to find out when I checked it out. I got it because I was a little desperate for a certain type of sanding, which I discovered later could be done with an angle grinder, and I'll get into that. But it was also very helpful on my initial project. My first video, you can see this pad getting torn up. And I was a little upset at the time when that happened, because these pads aren't cheap, they're 20 or 30 bucks. But since then, I've actually kind of used it to my advantage, because sanding inside bowls, you can see in my second power carving video, I put the full-size disc on, and then it kind of wraps around, and that helps with the concave shapes. So the other thing that I found with this particular sander was very helpful was the variable speed combined with changing the grits. It offers a whole lot of control. Again, pretty expensive because it's one of the Festool tools, but it's an interesting tool, and it was very helpful. That said, had I got something else to work, which I'm about to show you, I never would have gotten that. Unfortunately, it's too late for their 30-day guarantee return policy, so I have it now. I might sell it, we'll see. But it was a good tool that helped me get a job done. So next, I want to show you this guy. This guy is just a plastic backing pad, I think they call it, or sanding disc. And then you put a resin fiber sanding disc over it. Put those on the detail cam there. So now these are interesting. This seems like it's just like your regular Velcro backed papers that you put on a random orbit sander, but it's not. It's a bit thicker and stiffer. It lasts a good amount of time. This is actually even a Harbor Freight one, but it lasts a good amount of time. This particular setup is $3 for the plastic wheel and a flange that goes on here, which I don't have handy. But for $3, putting that on an angle grinder, you really can't go wrong. When I first tried that on my angle grinder, I couldn't get it mounted, and that's because you have to remove a certain flange from the bottom of the arbor. I'll go over that in a separate video about angle grinders, but originally I couldn't get it mounted, and then once I did get it mounted to my grinder, by doing research and finding out to remove that particular flange, it was burning up the wood as I tried to sand, so I was it just wasn't working out for me. Flash forward to now, I've learned some different things, and the option for that, or the best way to avoid the burning, is to use a variable speed grinder. So I'm going to go into that in an angle grinder video, which will also be posted at the same time as the rest of this series. So anyways, this is a great option. It's $3, and if you combine it with that gold wheel from Harbor Freight, this also came from Harbor Freight, you can get, not including the grinder, you can get power carving for, you know, less than $20, which is awesome. $3 for the wheel, you add some sandpaper for another $2 or $3, and that gold carving disc, and you can do a surprisingly large amount of things with those. So if you're trying to get in it on a budget, check those out. The other type of wheel I used was, oh, here's the flange for that, by the way. Just happened upon that in my pile of goodies here. So here's the flange that goes, and that screws on the arbor on your angle grinder. So there's that. Another option, which is very common in the welding world, not so much in the woodworking world, is what's called a flap wheel or a flap disc. This is essentially just a bunch of little pieces of sandpaper arranged kind of like fallen dominoes, little flaps around a wheel. And that's really nice because it's good for getting into concave shapes in particular, and it tends not to gum up so much compared to other sandpapers. I use them all the time in welding. They're super great. You can get them in a few different grits, not quite the same as sandpaper, but you can still get them in a few different grits, and they mount to the angle grinder more easily. Again, I had the same problem when I tried that on my traditional single speed angle grinders, and that was that it was burning the wood. And I'll show you that here in a sec, what's happening there. Before I do though, here's another pad. Now this particular pad is actually considered a polishing pad. I got it for I think about $5 or $6 at Harbor Freight, and it's Velcro lined, just like an orbital sander would be. That's kind of interesting though, because if you want to use your grinder similar to how the Festool RAS115 works, you can grab this pad and it's similar. Again, it's not going to be the same by any stretch of the imagination, but if you want a similar type of pad on your angle grinder, that's an option, and they have them at Harbor Freight. Like I said, $5 or $6, something like that. So that's an option. Now, when I talk about the wood burning when you're trying to sand with an angle grinder, here's what I mean. This guy is a flap wheel sanding on my traditional Milwaukee angle grinder, which I'll show you in my angle grinder video. At its standard speed, it burns the wood when you use a flap disc or sandpaper, which I'll show you on the opposite side. So here is the Milwaukee, just simple angle grinder running at 11,000 RPMs, and it's burning. Here is another grinder I tried, which is a variable speed grinder at full speed. Same deal, burns the wood. Now, the trick when you're sanding with an angle grinder is you need to be able to control the speed. So here is a variable speed grinder with a flap wheel, and this is on its lowest setting, which I believe is 2,800 RPMs, no burning. You can see I removed less material even though I was grinding for the same amount of time, but obviously slower, it's not going to take as much away, but it doesn't burn as much, or at all really, which was awesome. Here I have the grinder about halfway, which I don't know the exact speed, but it's halfway between 2,800 and 11,500 RPM on that particular grinder, which allowed me to remove a good amount of material without burning, or much burning. It might have burned a little bit here, but I was able to kind of go back and get rid of it. So that's the key if you're using your angle grinder for sanding wood, and that is that you need to control the speed. So with that, you want to look at a variable speed grinder. I'm going to talk to you about that in the next video. Another option here, just to show you, here is the backing disc. So this little black backing disc that I mentioned on a variable speed grinder. Here it is all the way up. Now the camera's kind of bleaching it out a little bit, but there's some burning right in here and in here, and that's with it at its full speed. So again, sandpaper, full speed on a grinder, which usually is between 11,000 and 13,000 RPMs. It's going to cause burning in the wood. Here it is at half speed, still burning a little bit though, not good. Here it is at the slowest. So that's helpful. And that I found the burning happens more in concave shapes. When you're doing convex shapes or outer edges, you can get away with a little bit more not having the grinder so slow. You can get away with faster speeds, I should say. But with a variable speed grinder and changing different grits, you really have a lot of control, which is what I loved about this Festool RAS115 sander, and later found available with a variable speed grinder. The Festool actually kind of helped me put two and two together as to why the sandpaper on a grinder was burning but not on that, and that was because of the RPMs mainly. So here you can see the grinder is at its slowest speed, and I just knocked down the corner of this 2x4. Now when I turn the grinder up using the same grit, it removes a lot more material in the same amount of time. That really allows you a lot of control for shaping. And you can actually do a lot of shaping just with sandpapers on your grinder. So keep that in mind as well. So that's kind of sanding in a nutshell, what I've tried. Stick around for the next video, which I'm going to show the different angle grinder options that I've tried. I've tried a few. And yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Have a good one.